Welcome, everybody. We're just waiting another minute or two while everybody gets logged on and gets connected. So hold on for just a moment. While people are getting logged on, feel free to enter in the chat where you're from and what your favorite tree is. We've got the Panhandle in. We've got South Florida in. Very nice. North Central Florida, Alachua County. Very nice. Homestead, Lee County. All parts of the state getting represented. St. Augustine Beach, nice. Tampa, DeLand. Pensacola, very nice. I love crepe myrtles. Japanese blueberry, nice. Great. It looks like most people have gotten logged in, so you can keep letting us know what your favorite trees are and where you're from, and we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Wickman. I'm the Assistant Director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and I'd like to welcome you to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. Today's webinar is What's New with Tree Selection and Care with Dr. Andrew Koeser. Your microphones have been muted, and we'll be closing the chat feature that you're using right now early on in the presentation. Please put any questions that you have during the presentation into the Q&A box, and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is approved for 1 FFLCP, LIAF, ISA, FDAX, LF, LCLM, LLO, and CLO, DBPR, LA and CAM, and 1 FNGLA CEU. There is a $15 administration fee to receive a certificate for that CEU. I'll put a link in the chat box in just as soon as I get done with introductions to make payment for the certificate if you've not already done so. We'll submit for the CEUs to the licensing agencies on Friday, so make sure if you want your CEU to make payment by the end of the day today. This is part of a monthly webinar series held on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be October 14th with Dr. Jiang Li talking about public perceptions of sustainable landscape practices. Also, you'll see a survey invitation pop up. Please take a moment to fill that out and let us know what topics you like, what interests you. We'll be planning the 2026 webinar series shortly, and your responses are going to really help us figure out what topics to add for next year. So without any further delay, I'll turn the floor over to Mark Celestin to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. My name is Mark Celestin, and I am the training coordinator for the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. We are thrilled to have you join us today for our webinar on the topic of what's new in tree selection and care. Today's speaker is Dr. Andrew Koeser, faculty for the Center for Land Use Efficiency, which we refer to as CLU. As a faculty member, Dr. Koeser is charged with protecting and conserving Florida's natural resources by developing research-based, sustainable urban landscape practices. Dr. Koeser works directly with arborists, landscapers, nursery growers, and urban foresters to both reduce the inputs and increase the ecological benefits associated with urban and residential greening. Without further ado, I present to you Dr. Andrew Koeser.
Thank you very much, Tom, putting this great seminar series together. and thanks for inviting me to present today. Today I'll be talking on tree selection, and I'm focusing on resilience because we live in a state that is the forefront of a lot of things, and we'll talk about that in the coming moments. Looking at this opening picture, this is an overview shot of the city of St. Petersburg, where I live, and you can really see that the decisions we make as individuals coalesce into like one urban forest, right? And if we make the wrong decisions over and over again and repeat them, we are setting up future generations of the citizens of St. Petersburg and future managers up for a harder time than they need to have. So the selection process is that first step in creating a more resilient urban forest. We're informed by the environment, we're informed by the trees and palms available to us, and we, if we consider the things I talk about today, can make better choices that will set us up for a more robust landscape that can handle all the challenges that our state has to offer. So I'm not going to talk about, I guess I'm talking about right now. I'm not going to talk about right tree, right place, right? I'm sure you've seen a slide like this 100 times for the professionals in the room. Right tree, right place is just essentially making sure that the tree is sized for the environment so it is not, impacting infrastructure like poles, power lines, underground utilities, underground sewers, all that stuff. That is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about resilience, but that is a key part of selection. Similarly, I'm not going to talk about anything you'd see in a master gardener program where you're talking about, soil type or hardiness zone or drainage or things like that. Again, all those things are important. We need to focus on them, but it is not the focus of this study, or this talk. I'm going to talk about, right, those are what we call like, chronic conditions that can really ravage a tree slowly over time. Trees just typically don't do things fast, but they can respond to external factors when they're more um, when they're just more severe, right? And I call these things, borrowing from biblical or other texts, the four horsemen, right? So I'm going to talk about pestilence, war, famine, and what that means for a tree, and then death. Those are things that we worry about as humans, and they have, I'd say, parallels in the plant world, the fauna or megaflora world of trees, in pests and diseases, so that's pestilence, invasives, which is a war between the newly introduced species that are maybe more aggressive and our natives, famine, which could be limiting environments, such as, truly famine environment for a tree would be limited sunlight, but, limiting for the soil as well. And then hurricanes would be just death. That is probably the most dramatic event, maybe aside from wildfire, that hits our state regularly. And doing our best to make sure that we are ready for those in the future will set us up for success on a long-term timeline. Pests and diseases. So, this is a recent study that came out that I just really loved. It's one of those studies that on its face seems very simple, right? It's like the studies that have the biggest impact in science and biggest impact in the journals that are out there are simple questions that take a lot of effort to answer. And a very simple question is, how many tree species are there in the world, right? Well, a team of researchers, I think the first page was two-thirds full of authors, who were in charge of herbarium and arboretum collections across the world, grouped together to give their best estimate of how many species there are. They estimated that in North America alone, which is kind of our sphere of influence, they have found 8,600 different species in North America, primarily in Central America, right? Like, not, I mean, it was throughout the entire the continent, but our hotspots for diversity tend to be the Caribbean and Central America, right? What they did that is really cool is they figured out, based on their best guess, how complete the collections are to date, and they estimated that there are still nearly 3,000 species left to be discovered on this continent, or 2,400 species. So very cool. So we have a lot of natives to choose from on this continent. How does that relate to what we see in our urban environments? Well, I that's kind of my realm of influence. I work with cities and local governments, often doing mega inventory projects to help them develop management plans for the future. One reoccurring project that I work on quite often is with the city of Tampa. I think we're up for renewal this year if they choose to go forward with that. And we do a canopy and urban forest analysis. The canopy assessment is remote sensing, and the urban forest analysis is going plot by plot over 200 plots throughout the city, boots on the ground to see what trees and native and invasives and everything in between exist within the jurisdiction of the city of Tampa. Last time that we did this, we found that they had 112 unique species in the inventory, which is quite a bit of diversity, right? It's not 8,000 for the whole continent. Again, Florida is a small part of that continent, but 112 is nothing, no small feat, right? That diversity is hands down greatest in residential land areas. All the homeowners in the group, you plant collectors out there, you kept us hopping, trying to figure out exactly what weird thing we were looking at sometimes. And that love of plants is what drives diversity in the residential areas, where commercial properties, industrial properties tend to be more of a conventional palette of plants that are available in mass quantities through our nursery markets. But because of that collective mentality and the grabbing rare things from swap meets and things like that, of the 112 species, the vast majority occurred only singly or rarely, maybe less than 3% of our collection, right? So even though we have diversity, evenness, and other factors that, people use to assess, diversity beyond richness, we're lagging. And that plays out in our data. So if you look at the city of Tampa and you look at their canopy coverage, their percent leaf area, nearly half of the leaf area of Tampa comes from live oak, laurel oak, cabbage palm, or cypress. And the cypress tend to be in the undeveloped areas that are just too swampy to develop by the Hillsborough River. Cabbage palms are anywhere you don't mow for long enough. And live and laurel oak tend to be the street trees and the yard trees where the canopy affects people most. You'll notice there that you're looking at, three families, three genuses, and only four species, right? So the live and the laurel oak are in the same genus, and a lot of pests are genus specific. So that diversity between the two species may not even be helpful, depending on what threat is coming their way, as far as pestilence is concerned. We did other projects. We did an assessment of 150 or so parks in the Hillsborough County region, where we looked at, every single park we delineated with the help of their GIS department, and we marked every major tree by a building that wasn't in a natural area, got the species, did risk assessments, and in our data set, which is mostly focused on individual trees, not like big clumps of forest, we found that nearly 40% of the trees in the Hillsborough County Park System, out of the nearly 11,000 trees we measured, nearly 40% were one species of live oak, right? So, live oak's a great tree. I love it. I really do. but we need to plant less of it in our urban environments. We need, first of all, as you'll see later on, the thing can grow 120 feet wide. Um, but beyond that, we can't put all of our eggs in one genetic basket and set ourselves up for failure. How does that diversity, how does Florida compare to the rest of the world, or the rest of the nation in this case? I actually did a study with Richard Hauer and Dr. Ma and several other folks that he knew, both in China and across the U.S. Um, and we found this is part of a survey that Richard did. He had a kind of a census, we called it, of arboricultural programs. We sent the survey out to every urban forestry program over 50,000, and then a sampling of those below that. And we asked them what their top 6 species were. And that question alone was one of the hardest working questions in that whole survey. We found that, for the average city, just 6 species are 60% of the urban forest, right? And then 2 regions, the Midwest and the Northeast, one genera, Acer or maples, made up about a third of their urban forests, right? So this is playing out over and over again. There's a lot to explain this. Nursery and tree procurement supply chains, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it is playing out over and over again. And this is kind of a figure that we developed to discuss why we have this narrowing of diversity. If you think of diversity as a giant funnel with layers of filtering, at the very top you have all the biological diversity that exists in your region. And that biological diversity that exists in the region is influenced by the native range of the plants that, in the continent, what they can handle for the stresses in your region, and a lot of things that are inherent to the species and the environment that are Florida, right? So we already have limitations. Out of the 8,000 trees in North America, we don't have all of them. We don't have Sitka spruce or some other things from the north and the northwest. But so we do have some narrowing right there, but it's still a pretty big pool, right? Then you get to production. So what can the nursery growers and nursery industries produce? And it comes down to availability. Is there someone getting seeds for them? Is there someone selling seed or liners in that? Mostly seed in our area. Can it be propagated? Is it something that there's a reason we can't do it because we haven't cracked the code for propagation? Is it just too much? Is it such a special little flower that it takes too much to keep it growing straight and true the way that most people want them in the state? Is it too slow growing? There's a race for trees, and this race rewards trees that are weedy and get to the finished size of 2 inches or 3 inches or whatever it is in caliper as soon as possible. Because every year it takes to grow that is another year of input before that payoff. So our current system of sizing by tree size and not age is really pushing people towards the weedier, faster growing trees. And then, past demand and past and risk aversion to try new things that don't have a proven market keeps people producing the same things over and over again. Design limitations. We talked about right tree, right place earlier. You just don't have space for a lot of the bigger growing trees. That doesn't stop you from planting them in our urban areas, but they do. That is a limiting factor. Urban areas also may have limiting light. Some of our urban corridors where it's highly built with skyscrapers, they can become tunnels where there's not a lot of light. Water availability is huge for our soil volumes and things like that. Soil quality in urban areas tends to be degraded. Temperatures are elevated, and all these things work against even our hardy natives because in creating a very non-native, non-natural environment that only a select few can make without extra care, which we can provide, but we often don't. And then just adoption limitations. So individual designers may have their go-to species that they like and they know they can source for a project that won't come to fruition for like 2 years. Um, Cities and governments, this is a project I'm working on right now, can have plant lists. Some of those are like 6 species that a city will allow planted in their developments. And some of them actually appear to be flipped with invasive lists. It's quite a trip working on that project right now. And then when you have things like you only want a Florida fancy or a Florida number one, that can limit some species that just don't want to grow that way without a lot of extra prodding from a grower, which makes them, it kind of prices them out of the market, right? So, and then there's knowledge. There's some people that just don't know what species are out there, and they go with what they see already and what they trust from past experience, right? So as all these things factor together, becomes narrow, 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 and then we finally have this trickle down effect where maybe 10 or so species for a given area, Central Florida or Northern Florida or Southern Florida, kind of leach out. And the fact that our industry is so disjointed and we don't often collaborate within each other, we have people making decisions in their own silos. We have growers working with their historic data and their knowledge and what they can produce, kind of setting the stage for what plants are available. We have designers who may not even have experience with plants in their formal training. We have landscapers who know what maintenance certain plants are going to do and can actually change designs on the fly as they're installing it. All these, they all have competing wants and needs and desires and knowledge bases. And if you don't all work together to move this situation at the same time, it leaves the last picture of the urban foresters and the arborists wondering, how did they inherit what they inherited? And we all need to collaborate together. We all need to work together. Every one of these individual groups are extremely knowledgeable, and if we share that knowledge, we can get past um, the problems we're seeing with low diversity in Florida. Um, and it's not to belabor this point too much, but our design aesthetics reward repetition in monocultures, right? And some of them are just plants that are just go-to because we know they're going to work in tough environments like parking lot medians, and other times it's just an overall look that drives this tendency to rely on just a few species over and over again. And while that may be beautiful when things are going right, we've seen in the past that beauty can be fading. So we have Dutch elm disease as one of the first, along with chestnut blight and other things in the early 1900s. So elms, American elm, was a silver bullet tree that could handle really tough environments because it grew a lot of riparian species that grow in challenging saturated environments with flooding and things like that, do really well in urban areas. And it had this amazing vase-like shape that created corridors on not unlike our live oaks across the entire North and Midwest, right? People love this species to the point where when it did have an invasive pest, which was the European bark beetle bringing the pathogen with it as a vector, Dutch elm disease, it didn't take long for the disease to kind of run through communities, um, both from the vector itself and from root grafts below ground. You know, just it's heartbreaking to see the loss of that canopy in a very short time. Like I said, trees don't normally do things really quickly, and when they do, it's quite dramatic. Normally these things would phase out over decades, tree by tree, and have time for replacement, but they were all lost within a very short time to this disease and the subsequent recovery efforts. But we learned better, right? So, like ash was not our go-to species, but we had this other riparian species that is, well, a genus, I guess, Fraxinus, the ashes, and these are going to be our new go-to. They're not, in my opinion, they're not as pretty, but man, they are tough, and that's all that really matters in urban areas. These silver bullet plants, nothing attacks it, unlike our elms. So we planted, this among other things, but we did go heavy in ash. And in the 1900s, emerald ash borer, a borer from Asia, was transported in some shipping materials to Detroit area, and it quickly spread. And this thing attacks every ash from the biggest to the smallest. Um, Dutch elm disease leaves some shrubby elm around to reproduce, right? And you can see here, this is showing, and I'm sorry it's a little blurry here, historical canopy coverage in the city of Milwaukee. You can see in like the 60s, you had peak canopy with elm in the city. You can see here 6 years later, uh, emerald or Dutch elm disease has moved through, and now in 2013, many decades later, we still haven't come anywhere near what we had for canopy before because we just keep having these massive die-off events, whittling back our canopy. And we need to have greater diversity to prevent this so that future generations can enjoy the canopy that those in 1963 enjoyed in these regions. Unless we think that this is all about northern United States, this is one that's really close to home for us in Florida. I got to move this so I can see the dates. So this was April 2015. This is right after I moved to Florida. We had a bold initiative with our highway department trying to show the care and maintenance and make a big impression on the visitors in our state. This is I-4 and I-75 interchange. Lethal bronzing, then called Texas Phoenix decline, moved in by December, starting to knock back these palm trees. And by June 2016, there's like one phoenix left, and it's probably dead, just doesn't know it yet, right? In the back there. So we do have these same pressures, these same mistakes in our own landscape. Luckily, we've learned from them, and now we've switched to all Mexican fan palms on an interchange. So they're another go-to species. Actually, anything you say is resistant to lethal bronzing, someone finds a test case of it the next month. It's a given in life, a truism. So when we select for trees for pest resistance, we want to determine what's already planted. We need to figure out what we're willing to lose, right? So this could be, we talk about the 10-20-30 rule. It's a rule of thumb. No more than 10% of any genus, no more than 10% of any species, 20% of any genus, and 30% of any family. You can have that, you can double that. It's not hard and fast. It is whatever you are willing to sacrifice should the next noxious pest cross our borders, right? Avoid species that are overly abundant. Avoid species of known pest disease problems. And this is one that John Ball brought over when he came here from North Dakota, is if you're going to try, if you're going to go big on something, don't go big on a species that is present in Eurasia, right? Europe or Asia. They have oaks in Asia, they have ash in Asia, they have elms in Asia and in Europe, right? And that supercontinent has a lot of diseases and things that we have not been exposed to, right? Almost like the smallpox kind of in the past, right? So if you focus on things like our natives here in Florida that just don't have a kind of a surrogate host abroad, you're doing much better, right? Because there is less of a chance that some disease or pest will jump, especially if it's hyper evolved to be hyper noxious to a certain host. So I will draw attention if you're looking for those species, you're looking for different species. Dr. Ryan Klein has put together an updated version of the Florida tree identifier tool, not identifier, selector tool, which pulls together all the fact sheets that we've been keeping alive after Dr. Gilman's retirement. So you can access that and find your dream underutilized species, right? When we talk about invasives, this one's gonna be pretty brief. You can talk about the pressures that the nursery industry face, and some of the carrots of the things that they're looking for. We talk about production. We want things that grow quickly, that produce abundant seed, so it's easy to collect seed for future propagation. have no special germination requirements. They don't need to be chilled or dipped in acid or nicked to get them to germinate, and they have few pest diseases. Well, believe it or not, those same traits that make them ideal for production are things that are really good for selecting or indicating that a plant will be an invasive. And at the time, when I got this figure, nearly 2/3 of the invasive plants in the state were brought here as ornamentals. So when we're thinking of ways to avoid war, which is in my mind, the horseman that is invasives coming in and outcompeting our natives, we want to make sure that we're looking at lists like the Florida Invasive Species Council list, which is available here. And then I'm going to, of course, bring up IFAS assessment next, but I'm going to let you click on that if you want to. And then the one that IFAS puts together, which is the IFAS assessment, which is designated out by type of plant, whether it's ground cover or tree or shrub, and the region of the state. And they show their methodology for that as well. Keeping an eye to these lists to make sure that what you're selecting is not on them is going to be key to making sure that we limit the amount of invasive threats that enter our state. I'll give you a second to click that. Okay. Limiting environments. So this is the famine part of the horseman that I was talking about earlier. I love trees, and a younger me would have seen this setting right here is someone's love for trees and their willingness to put it over things like someone's comfort or the risk of a raised sidewalk. And then one day when I was living in I was at the University of Illinois, I saw one of my neighbors try to get over a hump not quite as severe in their wheelchair in a snowstorm. And I realized how this shouldn't be a badge of honor for someone who loves trees. This should be a failed design that we need to address so that everyone has access to the places that they need to go throughout their day. And this has popped up throughout the state. A lot of our developments, they maximize the footprint of the house and on the lot. They put a little sidewalk in, and then they have tree mandates from the county or the city that they're in, and they plant them without even caring because they'll be gone before there's a problem. One of these developments was a Seven Oak neighborhood in Pasco County, where they cut down 2,000 oaks in one swoop to address sidewalk lifting that was only going to get worse over time, truly leaving them 7 oaks afterwards. We need to figure out what the minimum planting spaces are, and so that we avoid root flares interacting with our sidewalks like this. So, a good friend of mine, Eric North, he's now at the Arbor Day Foundation. He kind of led the way with this. He did a kind of an allometric study of trunk flares. So, allometry is like the relation of body part sizes. So, like, humans, how do their head sizes differ based on height or hands or whatever. They do that for trees too. And he was looking to see if there was a predictable relationship between trunk diameter and the root flare of a tree. So roots flare out. They put on really a lot of growth at that connection point between the soil and their trunk, because that's where a lot of the forces of wind movement are experienced. And whenever trees are moving, they try to stop that by adding growth, right? So we wanted to determine how far that flare went out, and then below that, the zone of rapid taper, where roots are really thick at the bottom under the soil surface, but thick enough to lift sidewalks. Based on a very common measurement, which is diameter at standard height, diameter at breast height, whatever you want to call it, which is like 1.3 or 1.4 meters above the ground. A common measurement in forestry that every city who has an inventory would collect that data. And we found that we had a very strong relationship between the diameter and that flare below ground, where roots were going out. And we created an equation where you predict um, how much space a tree needs based on the max that predicted tree trunk flare, for a tree, plus an 8-foot buffer, 4 feet on either side, which comes from literature, and that is how much space you need. So we use this equation to look at a bunch of data in your city and say, oh, well, live oaks in Ocala generally don't get much bigger than this, or Gumbo, Limbo, and Key Largo don't get much bigger than this. And this Gumbo Limbo here, it's gonna get probably this big in its lifetime, and I can use that diameter to predict the trunk flare diameter, and then add 8 feet, 4 feet on either side, and that's how big I need to go. And what we did is we created a fact sheet for this. And what we took that equation out of it, and we just gave you, and we based it on, these are state champion kind of metrics right here. The State Forest Service looks around at the native trees and some non-invasive species. They look at where the biggest specimens in the state exist. And I figured that's a good proxy for how big trees can grow in Florida. If you have your own data for a city, you're doing even better because you know exactly how big they can grow in urban environments in your area, but not everyone has that. And we use that to create a guide for planting width based on what I don't know if you can see the mouse here, but the max genetic potential, this is your champion status, and not knowing that like downtown Gainesville is probably not going to have a champion tree growing in the sidewalk there. What if you wanted to get to 25% of that maximum genetic potential, 50% or 75%? What would you need for a space? And those sets of tables are in how much space does my shade tree need, planting space recommendations for medium and large trees in Florida cities. This is since sunsetted, but I have a preserved copy on my ResearchGate page, which is right here. So if you want to get that list and link to it or whatever in code or whatever, it's right there. We also explain how to create these kind of measurements based on your own data for species not in our tables. It's weird, but no one's asking how much space can I give a tree. Everyone's asking how close can I get to that tree before it's going to be a problem. Land prices and development pressures being what they are. So we followed up that study, which was on bigger species, with a delightfully titled study called The Tripping Point: Minimum Planting Widths for Small Stature Trees in Dense Urban Environments. And we also that essentially the take home for that was that 8-foot buffer, the 4 feet on either side, you can have that based on projected trunk flare diameter. This paper is completely open access, so you can use that in your own efforts as well. So I did not make tables for this based on small stature species, unfortunately. And then last, we come to death, our last horseman that we need to select for to make more resilient urban forests. Hurricane landfalls have wreaked havoc on our local economies, bringing in $17 billion on average in hurricane damages to continental U.S. alone. And we have a history of using wind ratings here in Florida. A predecessor of mine, Dr. Mary Duryea, and her crew went, during the 2004 and 2005 hurricane season, went all over the state, collecting data and using and collecting expert knowledge to create wind ratings for the species that are most common in the state. And their ratings, they had 145 tree and palm species. They went from high wind rating to medium high to medium low to low. And so we, places have been trying to use these wind ratings. The city of Tampa has a Tampa tree matrix where they really try to make the case for, fill in a knowledge gap of what species are suitable for the city. And then they have all these fields about drought tolerance and wind resistance to help make informed decisions for people. You can plant species that aren't wind resistant, and I think you should because you don't want to create another filter that limits diversity. But when you do have a structure or a target present, that's where the wind resistant trees fall into place, right? You want to have those wind resistant trees by your targets, by the bus stops, by the playgrounds, or whatever it is, and leave the less wind resistant trees to native areas and less traversed areas, right? So City of Tampa makes this tree matrix. We looked at it, and only, about 40% of them did not have any wind rating whatsoever. And it had been a number of years since Dr. Durier had done her studies, so we figured we could fill in the void with some of our own data and data from folks around the world. We did a global literature review of hurricanes, looking at both rural and urban forest systems, but we really, we're focused on urban. They just tend to be less prevalent in the literature. And we found quite a bit of studies that had not been compiled before, and we put them all together for kind of an assessment of species ratings that I'll show you in a little bit. Just looking at where hurricanes travel, the eastern seaboard of North America, the Baja Peninsula, Madagascar and northern Australia, and then a lot in like Japan and China. These are our hot zones for where hurricanes are gaining speed and power and making landfall. So, um, couple take homes: larger trees are generally more likely to fail. So we need to consider things like slenderness and crown width. That said, if you have a large tree on your property, removal is not the first thing you can do or should do, right? I just saw a study that came out from Florida Institute of Technology showing that trees around your property can have the suction forces of hurricane winds on your roof. So having trees around your house can actually protect them, right? So if you're worried about tree size, you can reduce the canopy of your tree. And what that does is it builds a safety factor in on your tree. That root system and that trunk that was sufficient to support a tree in all but hurricane events beforehand is now supporting a much smaller canopy with much less wind loading, and it's now overbuilt because you reduce the canopy in an appropriate manner, not topping it, but working with a qualified arborist to cut back the outer branches. Tree species is another thing, and this comes to the selection part. In almost every study where tree species is recorded, it is a significant predictor of wind resistance and survival during a storm. And then native species, where they're in regions where hurricanes are most prevalent, so like Japan and Florida, but maybe not like Gander, Newfoundland, or whatever, where like a random storm hits every couple hundred years. Native status it can be an important predictor where there is sustained pressure year after year. Um, so yeah. So what we did is we took all that new data, we added to Maria's data. We didn't have access to how she came up with her ratings. So what we did is we created a machine learning model to take failure data from her studies and our studies and other factors and predict her ratings. You can put them in the four bins and then give a confidence level for our new assessments based on the data available. So and that new guide, which I think we've over doubled, I think we added over 200 new species. Again, a lot of them outside of Florida. So we added more data to the Florida species, but we have expanded it to more of a global reach. That was funded by FEMA, and it is now a multi-page document with, you want to go, if you're looking for the ratings, you got to go to the appendix in the back, but it's right there if you want to look at it. So something you can hang your hat on when you're trying to make storm-resistant corridors in your city, or if you are planting by your house, if you're a homeowner. And we also publish this for the scientific community in arboriculture and urban forestry, which is my favorite journal. Honestly, it is my society's journal, and they are fully open access now. They used to have like a 1 year embargo for non-members. They have made all their articles completely open to the public for free. So, and the authors don't pay page charges, so it's a win-win for scientific communication. So yeah, so we are working on filling that in now. So with that, I'm going to end this presentation. Everyone wants to make, they when they plant a tree, they envision something like the Baranoff Oak here in Safety Harbor, where it'll be a lasting legacy, something that they help create for future generations. And if we're careful and we plan for the Four Horsemen, maybe not every tree is going to make it, but enough will be there that we have an urban forest for our future children and grandchildren and things like that. So, with that, I have one quick plug. If you liked what you heard here, there's more of it coming up. And if you have some industry experience and you have ever thought about becoming a certified arborist, I know that certified arborist credits are available as part of this offering. I am teaching an online certified arborist course. It starts tonight at 7. So if you want to spend your nights with me and a whole cast of amazing speakers, we are doing this every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 9 weeks. It's a comprehensive course, and we'd love to have you. So, yeah, well, thank you very much. I have time for questions, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koeser, for a wonderful presentation. We do have just a couple of questions in the Q&A section here. We have the first question reads, how do we convince developers to not plant live oaks as required street trees when the LDC does not allow us to specify, especially as lot widths are getting smaller and smaller?
I mean, I'm not a big fan of tree lists to begin with, right? So like you have all of the diversity that the state has to offer, and you've chosen 12 or 30 trees that your city or county can plant, right? And that limits creativity, that limits experimentation. What I do think we need to do is a do not plant list, right? Um, and it could be, we a lot of I've been looking at a lot of code. A lot of code is just like do not plant any invasive species that shows up on this list, right? I think a code that is you do not plant any species that's more than 10% of the current urban forest or whatever, or you could list them out. I know that the city of St. Paul is doing this, or no, it might be Minneapolis. I'm sorry to confuse the two cities. They're distinct. I'm sure they would hate that. But yeah, they go neighborhood by neighborhood, and they're like, okay, this species over whatever percent, you can't plant it right now, and so that's a very limited nudge, and every city is going to have pretty much live oak over 10% if you chose that. Honestly, I would fathom a guess, unless it's just a very unique, maybe a key community down in the Florida Keys or something like that. So, or something in the swamp or something like that.
Thank you so much. We have the next question here. We still have 10 minutes for questions, so we will address what's here. How long should tree stability measures at a time of planting, ropes and wood stakes, be in place, and why do commercial and residential sites never remove them? Whose responsibility is it to remove them altogether?
Yeah, I'd say in Florida, for most sizes that we plant, except for the very big things, a year is perfectly fine, right? And if you time it that way, then you will be timed with hopefully follow-up care. Like first of all, any contract for planting that doesn't include follow-up care, which includes irrigation, um, you're rolling the dice on whether those trees make it or not, right? And that part of that contract that when you're doing planting requirements, if it's like a city bid or a county bid, should have the removal of staking materials within the evaluate, like the the early care evaluation period. Um, for developers, I mean, for the commercial sector, we just need to get that into HOA agreements and things like wherever people are doing this that are outside the purview of government funding and government procurements. We need to get the word out to them that that has to happen. People know enough to think that they need to stake trees, which is I think is necessary in the state. But then getting that message that it needs to come down is a knowledge thing, I think. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that response. Now we are addressing the next question here, focuses on planting oak trees in minimal spacing in Sarasota County. Years later, they are either damaged, destroyed, or uprooted by the hurricanes. So the question is, when the planting site is limited, why not plant a variety that will not do this or that will not allow the concrete removal or restructuring of that site specific where the live oak was planted? This is a long question, so this is me summarizing it.
yeah, I mean, I think the reason we see live oak planted in all the wrong places over and over again ad nauseum is that it's a beautiful tree. It's a great tree. There's a lot of pride behind it. It's a native, and it's super available in the market. You can if someone's growing a tree, live oak's probably one of them. And if someone knows of a tree, live oak's probably the tree they know of, and they just don't think about the long term consequences, right? I don't think I've ever seen. I've looked at like over 300 codes in the last couple months. I don't think I've ever seen a planting list that says no planting live oak, and and probably the vast majority have it as a recommended species. So if it's a recommended species and it meets the requirements that planning has put forth for developments, and it's one of the cheapest plants out there because it's hyper available, and every grower is selling it, and it's probably overabundant in the marketplace, people are going to plant it, right? So that's why I think there's got to be some nudges to say live oak's great, but only in the right places, and to find a way to codify that. So I love to see it. I want to keep seeing it. I think it's a go-to plant, but it not in those 4 foot strips. Like we got to find a way to keep that out of there.
Certainly. So the next question here, we still have about 7 minutes remaining with our allocated time. How familiar are you with the current discussion in Sarasota about Selby Gardens cutting down trees in order to expand their buildings and facilities? Or
I'm
do you
not at
do
all.
okay?
I know that buildings generally always win. So
Okay. Do you recommend silver cells for expanding root zones for trees in the urban setting?
yeah, if there's a will and the budget for it, you can get live oak in tight environments. Making sure that you don't have issues with uplifting sidewalks, but you can get the volumes you need quite well. So if you really value all the benefits that a large tree gives, and you just don't feel like a smaller stature tree can offer the um same desired function, you can engineer the below ground planting site to accommodate both um hardscape and sufficient rootingscape. There are so many options out there. Larry Costello from the University of California had a great book on alternative construction practices, which included things like bridging over roots. I've seen that in Tampa and elsewhere, and other options to make sure that there's sufficient space for trees while also allowing people to get where they need to go. So.
Absolutely. Next question here we will address. Can you expand a little bit on the use of root barriers to control flare?
Yeah, I don't think you can use a root barrier to control flare, but you can definitely use root barriers to control bigger roots, right? So if you're cutting into the root flare of a tree, which is the really, beefy roots right near the base, that's setting that tree up for failure in a windstorm, and for definitely some sort of effects to its health, right? But if you get a little further out, maybe 3 to 6 times the diameter, and you still have root lifting, I think root barriers are quite effective. Um, the one that I recommend the most, based on what I've heard from Dr. Gilman when he was still here, and my own experiences with it, are the hard plastic ones that physically deflect roots down. There's another one that has like a plant growth regulator in it. That's a fabric, but I'm not going to put out a name, but look for the ones that are hard plastic. And what happens is the root deflects like 18 or 24 inches or whatever it is, and then it goes back up to the surface where it wants to be for oxygen and water, right? But by the time it gets up to the surface, it's cleared the sidewalk. So very effective for sidewalks, maybe not as effective for like an asphalt parking lot where it's going to have time to get back up to the surface and be right at the base of the sidewalks. The crazy thing with pavements is they act like a mulch. They trap moisture, and they're warm, and then if it's they're near the surface, so it's like a perfect growing zone for roots, right? Um, and so it's kind of it's a problem we have biology and design working against us. So
Certainly. And we are nearing the end of our question list here, Dr. Koeser. But the theme for many of the remaining questions seems to focus on your arborist course upcoming. And the audience would like to know, is there a specific link you would like to share, aside from the QR code shared earlier? And what is the best way to maintain contact with you? Let's say someone had a tree specific question. How can they keep up uh with your research? Maybe asking specific questions to you as well.
yeah, I put my email in here.
Okay.
It's the chat live again.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're asking about the course, please hit me up in the next hour or two, and I'll get things rolling. I do a little errands and stuff right now, but I will pass the link on to you ASAP. And then for your other tree questions, like, email kind of works. I get swamped, so yeah, I do the email again as well. Otherwise, for some odd reason, like LinkedIn always works for me. So if you find me on LinkedIn, I'm right on the spot with that one. So kind of into the mix there. But like, there's hundreds of emails a day, honestly, and things can get lost in the quicksand that is my inbox, and slowly sink down. So, but I will keep an eye out specifically today for tree questions and for questions about the certified arborist course. So,
Certainly. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Koeser, for your time. Thank you to the host panelists, as well as everyone for participating in today's webinar. We look forward to collaborating with you at the next month professional webinar. Thank you all.
great. Thank you.